Hi, my name is Emma Carter, and at 32 years old, I stood alone in my wedding dress on a sun-drenched Malibu cliffside waiting for a wedding that would never happen. The ocean breeze swept through rows of empty white chairs, each one a silent testament to a promise broken. But what shattered my world wasn't the deafening silence of my absent guests. It was the single, brutal text message that lit up my phone, sent from the one person who should have been standing right beside me, my mother. What she didn't know was that in her moment of cruel triumph, she had handed me a weapon. That cold, glowing screen in my hand held more than just a few careless words. It held the beginning of her end. How did I go from being the loyal daughter, the celebrated strategist of my family's real estate empire, to a bride abandoned at the altar? How does a heart full of love learn to beat for revenge? It had all started just an hour before, with the sun warming my shoulders and the scent of salt and roses mingling in the air. The world felt soft, painted in the golden hues of a perfect California afternoon. I remember the weight of my dress, the crisp, expensive lace that fell around me like a dream. I'd designed every detail of this day myself, from the placement of the peonies on the archway to the string quartet that was supposed to be playing by now. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I smoothed down the silk of my gown, my fingers tracing the delicate embroidery. A flutter of nervous excitement danced in my chest. Liam, my sweet, gentle Liam, was waiting just out of sight, probably pacing and running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he was anxious. I smiled to myself, imagining his face when he saw me. He was my rock, the calm center in the storm of my ambitious, demanding family. But the silence was starting to feel heavy. It pressed in on me, thicker than the ocean mist. I glanced around. The caterers stood awkwardly by their stations, their faces a mixture of pity and confusion. The officiant kept checking his watch, his smile growing tighter with each passing minute. Where was everyone? My father, Daniel, who cried when I showed him the dress, my younger brother Trevor, who'd promised to behave for just one day, and my mother Margaret, the matriarch of the Carter real estate empire, a woman whose approval I had spent my entire life chasing. They're just running late, I told myself, my heart starting to thrum a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Traffic out of the city is always terrible. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Mom's contact. Before I could press dial, the screen lit up. A message from her. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. "See?" a voice in my head chirped. Just a simple delay. I opened the text. 3 words. 3 words that hollowed me out from the inside, leaving nothing but a cold, echoing void. "No one's coming." I read it again, and again. The letters seemed to blur, swimming in front of my eyes. It didn't make sense. It was a joke. A cruel, tasteless joke. My fingers, now trembling, began to fly across the screen. I called Mom, straight to voicemail. I called Dad, voicemail. Trevor, voicemail. One by one, the pillars of my world refused to answer. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up from my phone, truly seeing the venue for the first time. It wasn't a dream. It was a graveyard of my hopes, filled with rows of empty white chairs like pristine tombstones. The ocean breeze that had felt so romantic just moments before now felt like a cold, mocking whisper, rustling through decorations no one would ever see. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a perfect day for a heartbreak. A wave of disbelief so powerful it felt like a physical blow crashed over me. This couldn't be happening. My family, for all their complexities and dramas, wouldn't do this. They wouldn't abandon me on my wedding day. There had to be a reason. An accident. Something terrible must have happened. Panic began to claw its way up my throat, hot and acidic. I was about to dial 911 when my phone lit up again. It wasn't a call. It was a social media notification. My mother had tagged my father and brother in a new photo. My finger tapped the screen, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. The image that loaded felt like a punch to the gut. There they were, my mother Margaret, my father Daniel, my brother Trevor. They weren't on a dark highway shoulder next to a wrecked car. They were on a sunny beach somewhere, sand clinging to their feet. Mom was laughing, raising a glass of champagne high in the air. Dad had his arm slung around Trevor's shoulders, a wide, carefree grin on his face. And Trevor, he was looking right at the camera with a smug, triumphant smirk. They were happy. They were celebrating, and beneath the photo, a caption that stole the very air from my lungs. Finally reunited. Time seemed to stop. The sound of the waves faded into a dull roar. My entire universe narrowed to that glowing rectangle in my hand, to the image of my smiling, laughing family who had chosen to be anywhere but here, with anyone but me. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it felt like it had rewritten my past and incinerated my future in a single searing flash. The wedding, the dress, the man I was supposed to marry, it all dissolved into the background. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The trembling in my hands stilled. I lowered the phone, my gaze sweeping over the empty chairs one last time. They weren't tombstones anymore. They were witnesses. My right hand, the one not holding the phone, slowly curled into a fist, the knuckles turning white as I squeezed. The delicate fabric of my wedding dress strained against the pressure. A single, quiet whisper escaped my lips, a vow spoken only to the wind and the sea. This isn't over. The shock was already beginning to crystallize into something else, something harder, colder. As I stood there, a ghost at my own wedding, I could feel the girl I was just an hour ago dying. And I had no idea who or what was going to rise from her ashes. The world had gone silent. The whisper of my own vow, "This isn't over," was swallowed by the vast, indifferent ocean. I was a statue in a white dress, frozen on a cliffside overlooking the death of a dream. My fingers, numb and cold, were still locked around my phone, the screen a cruel, vibrant window into a world where I no longer belonged. I tapped the glass, my thumb zooming in on the photograph. My focus narrowed past the brilliant sunshine and blue waves, past my father's forced-looking smile, and landed on two details that twisted the knife in my heart. First, my brother Trevor's grin. It wasn't just happy, it was smug, dripping with the casual arrogance of a favored son who had finally won a game he didn't even deserve to play. And then, my mother's hand. She was holding a champagne flute, its crystals sparkling in the California sun. It was a toast. They were toasting my absence, toasting my pain. This isn't an accident, my mind echoed, the thought hard and sharp as glass. This isn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the rows of empty chairs. The brilliant white floral arrangements had started to wilt in the cooling air, their petals browning at the edges. A profound chill settled deep in my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. A sound behind me, the crunch of a shoe on the gravel path, made me flinch. My body tensed, a wild, cornered part of me ready to run. "Emma?" Liam's voice. It was soft, thick with a pain that mirrored my own. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I didn't want him to see how completely I had shattered. I felt his presence behind me, a warm shield against the cold emptiness of the venue. Then his arms gently wrapped around me, pulling me back against his chest. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "What happened?" He just held me, his chin resting on the top of my head, his body a solid, unwavering anchor in my collapsing world. I sagged against him, the strength that had held me upright for the last hour finally giving way. For a moment, I let the safety of his embrace hold me together. I remembered a board meeting from last year. I had just presented a 6-month strategy for a new commercial development, my research meticulous, my projections solid. When I finished, my mother had offered a thin, dismissive smile. A few minutes later, Trevor had tossed out a half-baked idea for a vanity hotel project, and that same smile had transformed into a look of genuine warmth and pride. It was the same look she had in the photograph, the look of a woman who had already chosen her winner. "We don't need them," Liam whispered into my hair, his voice a low rumble against my ear. His words were meant to comfort, but they sent a fresh wave of grief through me. I looked past the empty altar towards the entrance. A few familiar faces were gathered there, my maid of honor, a few of my colleagues from the firm, 2 of Liam's friends from college. They had trickled in, confused and concerned, the small handful of people who had shown up for us. Friends, not family. The people who were supposed to be my foundation, my history, had erased me. "We don't need them?" my inner voice screamed, "but they are my mother, my father, my brother. How do you just not need them? How do you cut a part of yourself away and pretend you're still whole? As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone pinged. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet twilight, sharp and invasive. It was another text from my mother. My blood ran cold. What more could she possibly have to say? Was this the part where she explained? The part where she apologized? Liam must have felt my body stiffen because his arms tightened around me. I pulled the phone up, my hand shaking again. The message wasn't an explanation. It was a decree. Focus on your future, not us. I stared at the words. So simple, so devastatingly final. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a wall being slammed down between us. Focus on your future. It was the kind of hollow advice she'd offer a junior employee she was about to fire. Impersonal. Cold. A command to move on, to forget, to accept my own exile without a fight. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an execution. They weren't just missing my wedding, they were severing me from their lives, and they expected me to accept it quietly. Did she mean it as a threat? A warning to stay in my lane, to not cause trouble? The words seemed to carry a subtle, menacing weight, a hint of the control she always wielded. Don't look back. Don't ask questions. Don't challenge us. Your story with this family is over. A new feeling began to stir beneath the hurt, something hot and sharp. Resolve. The shock was fading. The grief was hardening. My mother thought she could discard me like a failed business proposal. She thought she could text me out of her life and I would simply obey. She had underestimated me. They all had. I turned in Liam's arms, my face set. He looked down at me, his eyes searching mine, full of worry. He saw the shift, the storm gathering behind my eyes. I held up the phone, showing him the second text. He read it, and a flicker of disbelief, then anger crossed his features. I looked from his face back to the glowing screen in my hand. Focus on your future, not us. The words replayed in my head, no longer a source of pain, but a declaration of war. My future. I wondered how far this betrayal really went. Was it just about getting me out of the way for Trevor? Or was this just the beginning of a much larger, more devastating plan? They wanted me to focus on my future. Fine, I would. But it wouldn't be the future they imagined for me. It would be a future they would come to regret. The drive back from Malibu was a blur. I don't remember the traffic, the winding coastal highway, or the city lights. Liam drove, his hand resting on the center console, not touching me but close enough that I could feel his warmth. We didn't speak. There were no words for a wound this deep. Back in my condo, the silence was even louder. My wedding dress lay crumpled on a chair, a heap of ruined silk and broken dreams, looking like a ghost had shed its skin. Hours later, I was still sitting in the dark, the city lights of Santa Monica twinkling like distant, indifferent stars through my floor-to-ceiling windows. The raw, volcanic grief had cooled into something else, something hard and dense, like obsidian. My mother's final text message was burned into my mind. Focus on your future, not us. She thought it was a dismissal, a final crushing blow to put me in my place. She had no idea it was a command I was about to obey. My future. For years, my future had been synonymous with the Carter real estate empire. I was the strategist, the architect of its most successful deals, the one who saw value where others saw risk. I remembered being 25, sitting across from my mother in her vast corner office overlooking the Pacific. I'd just saved a multi-million-dollar acquisition from collapsing, and she'd looked at me with a rare, unguarded flicker of pride. "You have a gift, Emma," she'd said, her voice crisp and clear. "A mind for the bottom line. You see the weak points. You know exactly where to apply pressure." She taught me how to find the vulnerabilities in a deal. She never imagined I would one day use that gift against her. I walked over to my home office, a sleek, minimalist space where I'd spent countless late nights working for them. I opened my laptop. The cool, silver metal felt solid beneath my fingertips. The screen flickered to life, bathing my face in a cold blue light. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated to the secure portal for the Carter Group's corporate holdings. My credentials, still active, granted me immediate access. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent room. First, the property charter. It was the digital spine of our empire, listing every asset, every partner, every key executive. My name was right there, near the top, just below my mother's. Emma Carter, chief strategist. It used to be a source of pride. Now, it felt like a brand seared into my skin. With deliberate, precise keystrokes, I typed my formal resignation, effective immediately. I cited no reason. The silence was its own explanation. I hit enter, and a small part of our shared history vanished into the ether. But that was just the opening move. My mother taught me to always go for the queen. I navigated to the financial controls. My strategist role had given me high-level administrative access, a detail my mother, in her arrogance, had likely forgotten. I could see the lifeblood of the company pulsating on the screen: operating accounts, investment portfolios, lines of credit, millions of dollars, ready to be deployed for the next big project, probably one of Trevor's half-baked ideas. A wave of pure, unadulterated fear washed over me. This is insane. You can't do this. It was one thing to walk away, but this was an act of war. It was sabotage. It was a betrayal to match their own. Then I saw my mother's laughing face in the beach photo, champagne glass held high. I saw Trevor's smug grin, and the fear was instantly replaced by a surge of cold, exhilarating power. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Account by account, I initiated a security freeze. I built a digital wall around their money, locking it down so tightly that not a single dollar could move without a manual override that only I could provide. It wouldn't last forever, but it would be long enough to cause chaos. Tomorrow morning, when they tried to make payroll, when they tried to pay suppliers, when they tried to close deals, they would hit a brick wall. They would feel this. A mix of pure terror and dizzying triumph surged through me. I leaned back in my chair, my breathing shallow, my body humming with adrenaline. I had just taken a match to the foundations of my family's empire. I didn't have to wait long for the tremor. Less than 5 minutes later, a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. An email. The sender's name made my stomach clench. Marcus Thorne, head of legal, Carter Group. My mother's most loyal bulldog. My hand hesitated over the trackpad. This was it. The first echo of the explosion I had just set off. I clicked it open. The message was short, devoid of any warmth or preamble. Emma, an immediate administrative hold has been placed on all primary corporate accounts traced back to your user credentials. I need a full explanation within the hour, or I will be forced to escalate this as a malicious internal breach. This has severe legal implications. Call me. Severe legal implications. Malicious internal breach. He was threatening me. She was threatening me. Through him. The professional corporate language was a thin veil for my mother's fury. I could almost hear her voice spitting the words. For a second, panic seized me. What have you done? This could ruin you. This could mean jail. Then another image flashed in my mind. Liam's face when I showed him that second text, his quiet anger on my behalf, his steadfast presence in the ruins of our wedding day. He was my future now, not them. A slow smile, the first genuine smile I'd had all day, spread across my face. It felt foreign, sharp at the edges. I picked up my phone, my thumb tapping out a quick message to Liam, who was sleeping in the guest room. Perfect timing. I sent it, watching the single word disappear from my screen. It was a promise, a signal that my revenge was no longer just a thought, but an action. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I stared at the lawyer's email. I had fired the first shot. But I knew my family. I knew my mother. Retaliation would be swift and it would be brutal. The only question was, what form would it take? And when would it arrive? The week that followed was the loudest silence I had ever known. The lawyer's threatening email sat unanswered in my inbox, a digital time bomb. I expected a follow-up, a phone call, something, but there was nothing. Just a dead, suffocating quiet from my family's side of the world. It was a familiar tactic of my mother's, the silent treatment, designed to let anxiety and guilt fester until you broke. Liam had been my rock, his quiet presence a shield, but during the day, when he was at work, the silence in my condo was a living thing. It paced the floors with me, watched me, waited. I learned to live with it. I woke up each morning, made myself tea, and sat by the window, watching the California sun burn the mist off the city. I was creating a new routine, a fragile scaffolding of normalcy over the wreckage of my life. On the seventh day, the sun was particularly bright, streaming through the glass and warming the wood floor. I was holding a warm ceramic mug, the scent of chamomile and honey rising in the steam. For a fleeting moment, there was peace. A dangerous, seductive illusion of peace. And then it was shattered. A furious, percussive pounding slammed against my front door, so violent it seemed to shake the walls. It wasn't a knock, it was an assault. A man's voice, distorted by rage and the thickness of the door, roared my name. It was a voice I knew better than my own. My father. The warm mug in my hand suddenly felt icy cold. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, kicked into a frantic gallop. So this was the retaliation. Not a lawyer. Not a formal notice slipped under the door. A full frontal attack. My mother had sent her most volatile weapon. I took a slow, deliberate breath, my training as a strategist kicking in. Emotion is a liability. Do not engage. Observe. I placed the mug carefully on the polished surface of the coffee table, the ceramic making a soft click. I stood up and walked to the door, my bare feet silent on the floor. I opened it. He stood there, a storm in human form. My father, Daniel Carter, his face flushed a deep mottled red, his tie askew. His eyes, the same blue as mine, were wide and wild, bloodshot at the edges. For a horrifying second I saw not my father, but a stranger possessed by a fury so profound it barely seemed human. A memory, swift and painful, flashed through my mind. I was 6 years old, woken by a nightmare, convinced a monster was in my closet. He was the one who came in, who sat on my bed and checked the closet for me, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Nothing's gonna get you while I'm here, Em," he'd promised. "I'm your dad. It's my job to fight the monsters." He didn't give me a chance to speak. The monster was here now, and it was him. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice cracking. "What in God's name have you done to our company?" His focus was telling. Not, "What have you done to our family?" Not, "Are you okay?" But the company, the money. I saw then with chilling clarity that he wasn't here as my father. He was here as her soldier, sent to contain a threat to the empire. He thrust a paper into the space between us. It was a formal legal notice, the letterhead of my mother's law firm, stark and official. He shook it, the paper rattling with the tremor in his hand. "The banks are calling. The board is in a panic. Everything is frozen. Do you have any idea what you've done? This is everything we've built, everything your mother and I worked for." I looked from his contorted face to the legal document and then back again. I saw the fear behind his rage. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. My mother had built the empire, but he had enjoyed its fruits. He was scared of losing it all. And he was scared of her. He's not backing me down, I thought, a cold wave of certainty washing through me. He's trying to save himself. I let the silence stretch, letting his frantic, panicked energy crash against the wall of my calm. I refused to let him see the tremor in my own hands, the way my heart was beating against my ribs like a trapped bird. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. I was no longer the little girl who needed him to check for monsters. He couldn't see it yet, but I had become one. His tirade eventually ran out of steam, his chest heaving as he stared at me, waiting for the tears, for the apology, for the frightened daughter to undo her mistake. Slowly, I turned, walked back to the coffee table, and picked up my mug of now lukewarm tea. I took a small, deliberate sip, the familiar taste a small anchor in the storm. I turned back to face him, standing in the doorway of my condo, framed by the bright morning light. I looked him directly in the eye, my voice quiet, but as unyielding as granite. Not a chance. The fury on his face collapsed, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. It was as if I'd slapped him. He had come here expecting a child to scold. He had found a queen on her throne. He opened his mouth, then closed it, speechless for the first time. I gave him one last look, then slowly, deliberately, I closed the door in his face, the latch clicking shut with a soft, final sound. I leaned against the cool wood, listening to his stunned silence on the other side, which was followed by a string of impotent, muffled curses. I closed my eyes. The war had come to my door, and I had just proven I was ready to fight. After I closed the door on my father, the adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. His panicked rage wasn't the reaction of a man blindsided by my actions. It was the fury of a co-conspirator whose plot had just hit an unexpected snag. The question was no longer just why they had betrayed me, but how long the betrayal had been in the works. My home office, once a place of calm productivity, had transformed into a war room. The sleek, minimalist desk was now cluttered with papers, old financial reports, and printouts of corporate charters. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the low hum of my laptop, my only ally in the silent hours after midnight. As I sifted through the documents, fragments of memories began to surface, sharp and unwelcome. I saw myself in the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the Carter Group boardroom, presenting a new market analysis. I remembered the way my mother, Margaret, would listen with a look of polite, detached interest, her fingers steepled, her face an unreadable mask. She'd offer a curt, "Thank you, Emma. We'll take that under advisement." Then Trevor, my reckless younger brother, would present. He'd stumble through a half-formed idea, his projections based on wishful thinking rather than data, and I would watch as my mother's entire posture softened. A warm, indulgent smile would touch her lips, the cold mask melting away. "An ambitious thought, Trevor," she'd say. "Let's explore that." At the time, I'd dismissed it as a mother's blind spot for her son. Now, looking back through the lens of betrayal, I saw it for what it was: a quiet, systematic campaign to undermine my credibility while elevating his. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against a stack of papers. An unknown number. I hesitated, my stomach tightening, expecting another attack. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text came through. "Emma, it's Olivia. Pick up. It's important." Olivia, my closest friend at the firm, and one of the few people who had actually shown up at the wedding. My heart leaped. I dialed her back immediately. "Liv, are you okay? Is it safe to talk?" Her voice came through in a hushed, urgent whisper. "No, not really. I'm in a supply closet on the 3rd floor. Listen, I don't have much time. Something's wrong here, really wrong." I leaned forward, my hand gripping the edge of my desk. "What is it?" "Your mom. Margaret. She's been moving money. For months," Olivia whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was reviewing some internal expense reports and I found these huge fund transfers. Millions. All signed off by her, routed to shell corporations that I tracked back to Trevor's personal accounts. She's been siphoning company money to fund his projects behind the board's back." The room seemed to tilt. Embezzlement. My mother was using the company as her personal piggy bank for my brother. It was reckless, illegal, and utterly brazen. "Liv, are you sure?" "I'm positive. Emma, this is bigger than you think. This isn't just about the wedding. They're cleaning house. Before they cut my system access, I forwarded an email to your old corporate account. You need to see it." The line went dead. My hands were shaking as I navigated to my archived corporate email account. It took a few tries to remember the password, but finally, I was in. And there it was. An email from Olivia, sent the day after my disastrous wedding. The subject line was blank. The only thing in the body was a single attachment. A scanned PDF document. I downloaded it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was an internal memo dated 3 months ago. The title was innocuous: Preliminary Discussions on Executive Restructuring. I scanned the corporate jargon, my eyes darting through paragraphs about synergy and optimization. And then I found it. Buried in a subclause in Section 3 was a proposal to dissolve the chief strategist position and absorb its duties into the CEO's office, my mother's office. It was a quiet clinical plan to push me out, to erase me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a recent development. This wasn't a reaction to my engagement or some sudden family drama. This had been in motion for months. And then I saw the signature at the bottom of the last page. It was a list of preliminary approvals. My father's name was there, and right above his, the one that made me gasp for air, was my mother's, Margaret Carter. I printed the memo, the cheap hum of my printer filling the silence. I stared at the paper in my hand, at her name, her signature, a familiar loop of ink that now looked like a coiled snake. She signed this. She approved a plan to methodically strip me of my position, my career, my future, long before she sent that text message. The wedding wasn't the start of the betrayal. It was the finale. It was their triumphant celebration after the dirty work had already been done. I clutched the paper, my knuckles turning white, the crisp edges digging into my palm. My mind reeled, replaying years of memories, searching for clues I had missed, for other lies buried just beneath the surface. Was this planned all along? Since I joined the company? Since I was born? A terrifying thought took root in my mind, cold and sharp. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had been plotting against me for years. And if she was capable of this, what other secrets were hidden in the foundations of our family? The memo from my mother felt like a key, unlocking a secret room in my mind filled with years of carefully ignored slights and subtle manipulations. The betrayal wasn't a single event, it was a slow poison administered over a lifetime. This realization sent me scrambling, not for recent files, but for the past itself. In the back of my spacious walk-in closet, behind a row of winter coats that saw little use in California, was a small, locked door to a storage space. The air that puffed out when I opened it was cool and still, thick with the scent of cedar and old paper. Inside, under a single bare bulb, were boxes stacked high. The archaeology of my life. College textbooks, old photo albums, things I hadn't thought about in years. I was looking for old corporate files from my grandfather's era, but my fingers brushed against a smaller, lighter box labeled simply Memories. On a whim, I pulled it down, dust motes dancing in the dim light. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, and lifted the lid. Beneath a stack of old photographs and a dried corsage from a high school dance, I saw it. A thick, creamy envelope, heavy and stiff with age. The paper had yellowed to the color of old ivory. My name was written on the front in a familiar, elegant script that made my heart ache. It was my grandfather's handwriting. The envelope was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the Carter family crest, untouched. My grandfather had been the true founder of the company, a brilliant, kind man who taught me how to read blueprints when I was 10. I remembered him smelling of pipe tobacco and peppermint, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. He'd passed away when I was in college, leaving my mother in charge. He adored me, and the sight of this letter, a message from beyond the grave, sent a tremor through my hands. I carried the box back into my office like a sacred relic and sat at my desk. I stared at the sealed envelope for a long time, my thumb stroking my own name written in his hand. What could he have possibly needed to say to me that had to be hidden away like this? With a deep breath, I slipped a letter opener under the wax seal. It cracked with a soft, final sound, breaking a silence of over a decade. The letter was dated a week before he died. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but the words were firm. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the time has come for you to know the truth. I have watched you grow into a brilliant and capable woman, more than equal to anyone in our family, including your mother. It is because of this strength that I am entrusting you with this." He went on to explain that he had established a private trust in my name years ago. Tucked inside that trust was a secret, significant share of the company's original and most valuable real estate holdings, the foundational properties of the entire empire. He had structured it to be invisible, untouchable by anyone but me upon my 30th birthday. He'd left the letter with his lawyer to be delivered then, but the lawyer had died unexpectedly, and the letter must have been lost in his files, only now returned to me with his estate. My mother, who was executor of my grandfather's will, had either missed it or, more likely, buried it. She had hidden my inheritance from me. My head spun. This was proof, hard proof, that she had actively stolen from me. But as I kept reading, the letter took a darker turn. "I pray you never need this, Emma, but I do not trust your mother's ambition. It is a fire that consumes everything in its path. It consumed her sense of loyalty to me, and I fear it will one day consume her love for you." She was always impatient. She saw my prudence as weakness and convinced the board to shift power to her side, using methods I cannot bring myself to commit to paper. She secured her legacy by betraying mine. Be careful, my girl. She will see your talent not as a gift to the family, but as a threat to her throne. I dropped the letter onto the desk as if it had burned my fingers. My breath came in ragged gasps. It wasn't just about me. It was never just about me. She had done this before. She had betrayed her own father to seize control of the company. The way she had systematically undermined me, propped up Trevor, and planned my corporate execution. It was a pattern, a playbook she had run before on her own family. My mind reeled with the implications. Who else knows? The board members from that time? My father? A cold dread washed over me. This letter was everything. It was a motive. It was leverage. It was a weapon that could destroy her. My eyes darted around the room, a sudden sharp paranoia taking hold. I couldn't leave this lying out. I snatched the letter and the envelope, my mind racing for a place to hide it. I pulled a thick book from my shelf, a dry textbook on architectural theory, and slipped the letter between its pages, pushing it deep into the spine. Just as I slid the book back into its place on the shelf, I froze. A sound from the hallway outside my condo door. It was faint, barely audible. Not the furious pounding of my father, but the soft, deliberate scrape of a shoe on the floor tile, followed by an unnerving silence. My heart stopped. Every nerve in my body screamed. Someone was out there, and they were trying not to be heard. Was it my father back for another round? Or was it someone else, someone sent by my mother? My eyes flicked to the book on the shelf. The hair on my arms stood on end. Were they just watching me? Or did they somehow know about the letter? I stood frozen in the center of my living room, my body rigid, my ears straining against the silence. The sound from the hallway was gone. Had I imagined it? My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a frantic drum signaling danger. I crept towards the front door, my feet silent on the hardwood floor. My hand, slick with a cold sweat, reached for the doorknob before I stopped myself. I leaned in, pressing my eye to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The sconces on the wall cast long, distorted shadows, but there was no one there. Nothing. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, holding my breath, listening. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system and the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. I finally stepped back, my body trembling with a mixture of relief and undiluted paranoia. I wasn't safe. The walls of my chic condo, once a sanctuary, now felt thin as paper. The letter from my grandfather, hidden inside a book on my shelf, suddenly felt like it was radioactive, pulsing with a dangerous energy. I was pacing the length of my living room, trying to force my racing mind to think, when a sharp, frantic buzz from my phone cut through the silence. It was the building's video intercom. Olivia's face, pale and wide-eyed, filled the screen. "Emma, let me up," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Now, please." A jolt of fear shot through me. What if it was a trap? What if my mother had gotten to her, forced her to come here? But the genuine terror in my friend's eyes was unmistakable. I pressed the button to unlock the lobby door, my mind racing. Seconds later, there was a frantic knocking, and I threw the door open. Olivia practically fell inside, slamming the door shut behind her and immediately throwing the deadbolt. She was clutching a thick stack of printouts, her knuckles white. Her chest was heaving as if she'd run all the way here. "Liv, what is it? What happened?" "I kept digging," she panted, shoving the papers onto my glass coffee table. The spreadsheets and bank statements slid across the surface. "After I told you about the transfers, I couldn't let it go. It's worse, Emma. It's so much worse than I thought." She pointed a trembling finger at a highlighted row on one of the spreadsheets. "She's been siphoning millions for Trevor's ridiculous vanity projects," Olivia said, her eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "But it's how she's doing it. She's bearing the costs and the budgets of legitimate developments, forging invoices, creating fake vendors. This isn't just unethical. This is high-level, premeditated fraud. We're talking about embezzlement on a scale that could sink the entire company if it ever came out." I stared at the numbers, the columns of damning evidence. A sharp, vivid memory cut through my shock. I was in a budget meeting 6 months ago, questioning the bloated expense report for one of Trevor's projects. My mother had cut me off with a cold, dismissive wave of her hand. "I'll handle the finances, Emma," she'd said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You stick to strategy." I saw it now. She wasn't protecting her son's ego. She was actively hiding her crimes right in plain sight. As I absorbed the enormity of it, my phone began to ring, its cheerful, melodic tone a sickening contrast to the tension in the room. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, to silence the intrusion, but something made me answer, a gut feeling, a premonition. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Am I speaking with Emma Carter?" a man's voice asked. It was professional, crisp, and unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "My name is Ben Jacobs. I'm a reporter with the California Business Journal," he said. My blood turned to ice. "I'm working on a story about the Carter real estate empire, and I was hoping to get a comment on some rumors we're hearing about potential financial misconduct within the company." The world tilted on its axis. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was a rumor, and rumors in the business world travel like fire. I mumbled something about not being with the company anymore and hung up the phone, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I looked at Olivia, my eyes wide with dawning horror. "A reporter," I choked out. "A reporter knows." This changed everything. This was no longer a family drama playing out behind closed doors. The battle was about to go public, whether I wanted it to or not. The power I thought I held, with the frozen accounts, with my grandfather's letter, with this new evidence from Olivia, it was all an illusion. The narrative was spiraling out of my control. I sank onto my sofa, the stack of printouts spread before me like the wreckage of a plane crash. This was the weapon, the silver bullet. This evidence could ruin my mother, strip her of her power, and give me the ultimate revenge. But the reporter's call echoed in my mind. Exposing her meant exposing the company to the world. It meant destroying the legacy my grandfather built, jeopardizing the jobs of hundreds of employees, and creating a public scandal that would engulf all of us, including me. My brief, fleeting moment of empowerment was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of an impossible choice. I stared at the evidence, at the proof of my mother's betrayal printed in black and white. This could free me, or it could destroy us all. After Olivia left, the silence she left behind was heavy and suffocating. My condo, once my fortress of solitude, now felt like a glass cage. The evidence of my mother's crimes lay strewn across my coffee table, a minefield of paper and ink. The journalist's phone call had changed the atmosphere from one of strategic planning to one of imminent danger. The secret was bleeding out, and I was at the epicenter of the fallout. I felt exposed, watched, as if 1,000 unseen eyes were on me from the city beyond my windows. I spent hours just sitting on my sofa, staring at the damning printouts, the numbers swimming before my tired eyes. The weight of my choice, to expose her or to protect the legacy and the people caught in the middle, was a physical pressure on my chest. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every distant siren sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The soft scrape I'd heard outside my door days ago replayed in my mind, no longer a fleeting worry, but the likely prelude to something worse. Sometime after 2 a.m., I got up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, drawn by a need to look out, to see if the world was as menacing as it felt. My condo overlooked a quiet side street, bathed in the eerie orange glow of the streetlights. It was deserted. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to rub some warmth back into my skin. That's when I saw it. Across the street, in the deep shadows of an alleyway between two buildings, something moved. It was a subtle shift, a shadow detaching itself from the other shadows. I squinted, my heart giving a hard, painful thud. It was a figure, a person, standing perfectly still, looking up, looking right at my window. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a faint, momentary glint of light, a tiny sharp flash, like moonlight reflecting off a piece of glass, or a camera lens. A wave of pure, ice-cold panic washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone was physically out there watching me, documenting my movements. My mind immediately leaped to one person. My mother. She hired someone. This was her move. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. I was in my early 20s, sitting in on a meeting where my mother was dealing with a particularly stubborn business rival. "Everyone has a weakness, Emma," she had said with a chillingly serene smile. "You just have to be willing to hire the right people to find it." A week later, the rival had folded, his reputation ruined by a sudden mysterious scandal. My mother never admitted it, but I knew. She had sent spies. She had dug until she found something she could use, and now she was doing it to me. I stumbled back from the window, my body trembling, my mind screaming. I needed to lock the door, check the windows, retreat into the safest part of my apartment. My hand was on the deadbolt of my front door when I saw it. A small slip of white paper lay on the floor, slid neatly under the door from the hallway. My blood froze. The watcher wasn't just across the street. They had been here. They had been right outside my door, close enough to touch. The scrape I'd heard before, it was real. It was them. With a hand that shook so badly I could barely control it, I bent down and picked up the note. It was a single piece of paper, folded once. No name, no signature. I unfolded it. Inside, there were just 5 words typed in cold, impersonal block letters. "Stop digging, or else." The note fell from my fingers. This wasn't just a spy gathering information. This was a direct threat, a warning. They knew I was looking into things. They knew I had found something. The embezzlement, my grandfather's letter, they knew. The "or else" hung in the air, a promise of violence that was terrifyingly vague. This was my mother's ruthlessness made real, delivered to my doorstep. A sob of pure terror escaped my lips. I scrambled for the door, my fingers fumbling with the deadbolt before I finally slammed it home. I threw the security chain, the metallic clink echoing in the deathly quiet room. I backed away from the door, my back hitting the cool wall, my eyes wide with horror. I was trapped. I was a prisoner in my own home, and the enemy was outside my door, watching my every move from the shadows. Who was it? A private investigator? One of my mother's security goons? The journalist? My mind was a maelstrom of fear and suspicion. They were closing in, tightening the net, and I had no idea who to trust or where the next threat would come from. The days following the threat were a blur of sleepless nights and adrenaline-fueled paranoia. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my condo. I'd stopped answering my phone. I ordered groceries to be left in the lobby. The watcher in the shadows, the note under my door, they had succeeded in turning my home into a prison. Every floorboard creak in the hallway, every shadow that flickered past my window, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I felt hunted. Liam's presence in the evenings was a comfort, but the moment he left for work, the crushing fear returned, a constant, silent companion. Then one afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, my heart seizing with the familiar dread. But after the 5th ring, I answered, my voice a tight, hostile whisper. "Who is this?" A pause, then a voice I almost didn't recognize answered, stripped of its usual booming confidence. "Emma, it's your father." It wasn't the enraged roar from my doorway. It was a low, strained murmur, laced with something I hadn't heard in his voice in years, fear. "I need to see you," he said, his words rushed. "Alone, not at your place. The Rainy Day Cafe on 3rd Street. 1 hour, please, Emma, it's important." My mind raced, suspicion coiling in my gut. This is a trap. My mother couldn't intimidate me, so now she was sending him to lure me out into the open. The watcher would be there, waiting. But the raw desperation in his voice, it felt different. Against my better judgment, against every self-preservation instinct I had, I found myself whispering, "Fine." The Rainy Day Cafe was a small, anonymous place with steamy windows that blurred the world outside. I arrived early, choosing a booth in the far corner, my back to the wall, with a clear view of the entrance. The air smelled of damp coats and burnt coffee. Rain lashed against the glass, each drop distorting the city lights into a watercolored smear. It was the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting. He arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the furious man who had hammered on my door. He looked diminished, older. His shoulders were slumped under his expensive coat, and his eyes, dark with exhaustion, darted around the cafe before he saw me. He slid into the booth opposite me, avoiding my gaze, his movements furtive and anxious. He looked like a man who was terrified of being seen. We didn't order anything. For a long moment we just sat in silence. The only sounds the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the relentless drumming of the rain. Then he slid a thick manila file across the slick tabletop. I stared at it, then at him. What is this? He finally met my eyes, and I saw the deep, profound conflict warring within them. It's everything, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. Proof, more than what your friend found. Offshore accounts, falsified audits, contracts, everything she's been doing for years. I flinched. My friend. They knew I was talking to Olivia. The watcher had been thorough. I can't do it anymore, Emma, he whispered, his gaze dropping to his hands on the table. I can't stand her lies anymore. She's out of control. This thing with Trevor, she's going to sink the entire company to prop him up. She's going to destroy everything. A bitter, cynical laugh almost escaped my lips. A memory of the beach photograph flashed in my mind. Him smiling, his arm around Trevor, a willing participant in my humiliation. Her lies? I wanted to scream. You stood there. You watched her do it. You were part of it. As if he could read my mind, he looked up, his face etched with a misery so profound it momentarily silenced my anger. The wedding. That was her idea. She told me you were trying to stage a takeover, that you were planning to use your position to push Trevor out and seize control. I didn't know what to believe, but now this is too far. It was the oldest trick in my mother's book. Frame your victim as the aggressor. She had painted me as a threat to justify her own treachery. Then came the part that turned my world on its axis once again. I'll help you, he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping even lower. This file, it's enough to strip her of all power. I'll testify. I'll confirm everything. I'll give you your mother on a silver platter. I stared at him, stunned into silence. My own father offering me the head of my mother. It was a shocking, unbelievable twist. But then he delivered the final devastating condition. But you have to protect me, he said, his eyes pleading, yet hard. When this all comes down, you use this evidence to get the board on your side. You take control, and you make sure my name is cleared of any legal wrongdoing. You spare me, Emma. That's the deal. The air left my lungs. This wasn't about redemption. This wasn't a father trying to make amends. This was a calculated act of self-preservation. He wasn't jumping ship to save me. He was jumping ship to save himself. He stood up, leaving the file on the table between us. Think about it, he said, before turning and walking out of the cafe, melting back into the rain-soaked city. I sat there, frozen, staring at the file. It was thick, heavy with the weight of my mother's sins. It was the weapon I needed, the key to my victory, but it was a gift from a coward, poisoned by his betrayal. My hand rested on the manila folder, the coarse paper cool beneath my fingertips. Could I trust him? Could I make a deal with the man who had stood by and watched me burn, just to get to the woman who lit the match? The thought echoed in my mind, a cold and calculated question reflecting a part of my mother I now saw in myself. He's using me, but can I use him back? The file my father gave me sat on my desk for 3 days, a Pandora's box of my mother's sins. I spent one long, sleepless night poring over the contents, the neat columns of figures and forged signatures painting a portrait of a woman I barely recognized, a ruthless stranger wearing my mother's face. The evidence was a nuclear bomb, powerful enough to vaporize her entire world, but I knew that detonating it now, while I was still standing on shaky ground, would only ensure I was caught in the blast. My mother had taught me that revenge is a dish best served cold, but my grandfather had taught me that a solid foundation is everything. I couldn't dismantle her empire until I had started building my own. I put my father's file, my grandfather's letter, and Olivia's evidence into a safe deposit box. For now, the past would have to wait. My focus was on the future. My future on my terms. The next few weeks were a blur of relentless, focused work. I cashed out my personal investments, securing enough capital to start my own boutique real estate firm. I named it Carter Redevelopment, a small, defiant jab that I knew would not go unnoticed. I spent my days on the phone, leveraging every contact I had ever made, every bit of goodwill I had earned over the years when my name was still associated with success, not scandal. I called on old clients, architects, and city planners, people who respected my work, not just my family name. It was exhausting, humbling, and for the first time since my wedding day, it made me feel alive. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon in a sterile glass conference room overlooking the city. I was pitching to a major investor, a man I had worked with before at the Carter Group. He had been hesitant to meet with me, worried about the rumors swirling around my family. I didn't try to deny them. Instead, I laid out my vision, my data, my strategy for a new development, a project I had once pitched to my mother, only to have her dismiss it in favor of one of Trevor's follies. I spoke for an hour, my voice steady, my passion for the work eclipsing the personal turmoil. When I finished, the investor was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on my proposal. Then he looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. He extended his hand. "Welcome back to the game, Emma," he said. "Let's build something." I signed my first client. The ink from my pen on that contract felt more binding, more real than any signature on a marriage license. That night, my new family and I went out to celebrate. Liam, Olivia, and I sat at a corner table in an upscale restaurant, the kind of place my mother loved. But tonight, the warm lighting, the soft murmur of conversation, and the clinking of glasses didn't feel like her world. It felt like ours. "To Carter Redevelopment," Olivia said, raising her champagne flute, her eyes shining with pride. "To Emma," Liam added, his hand finding mine under the table, his touch a warm, steady anchor. "I've never been prouder." As we clinked our glasses, a memory surfaced. A family dinner from years ago, in a restaurant just like this one. My mother had raised a glass to me after I'd closed a particularly difficult deal. "To Emma," she had said, her public smile wide for all to see. "A true asset to the family business." An asset, not a daughter. A tool to be used for the good of the empire. I pushed the memory away, focusing on the two faces in front of me, their support genuine and unconditional. This was my family now. In the middle of our main course, my phone vibrated on the table, a private number. My blood ran cold. I knew, with absolute certainty, who it was. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, my voice tight. I walked away from the table, my heels clicking on the marble floor as I headed towards the quiet of the restaurant's lobby. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, Mother?" Her voice was exactly as I expected, pure, frigid ice. "I hear you've been busy, Emma." "Carter Redevelopment. How clever. A desperate attempt to stay relevant." "I'm just focusing on my future like you told me to," I said, my own voice calm, betraying none of the frantic pounding in my chest. A humorless laugh crackled through the phone. "Don't be naive. You are playing a game you cannot possibly win. You have no idea what you're up against. This is your one and only warning. Back off. Dissolve your little company and walk away before you get hurt." The threat was unmistakable, dripping with menace. The old me would have been terrified. The old me would have stammered or cried or pleaded, but the woman holding the phone now was not the same one who had stood abandoned at the altar. I listened to her threats, to her condescending dismissal of my life's work. When she was finished, I didn't say a word. I just held the phone to my ear, letting the dead air stretch between us. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I pressed the end call button, cutting her off mid-sentence. I stood there for a second in the lobby's opulent silence, my reflection staring back at me from a gilded mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning with a resolve that felt unbreakable. This is my fight now. I walked back to my table, back to my life, leaving my mother and her threats alone in the dark. The war was no longer about revenge, it was about survival, and I was just getting started. My mother's threat hung in the air for weeks, a promise of retaliation that never came, but the silence was more unnerving than an open declaration of war. It was the quiet before a storm. I used that time to prepare. I worked with Olivia to consolidate all the evidence, my father's file, my grandfather's letter, the proof of embezzlement. I met with lawyers, and I made a decision. I would not wait for her to strike. I would create my own thunder. I called the press conference. The moments before I stepped on stage felt like a dream. I stood in the wings of the rented hotel ballroom, the air thick with the smell of industrial carpet and stale air conditioning. Beyond the heavy velvet curtain, I could hear the low, hungry murmur of the assembled press, a sea of sharks waiting for blood. Liam squeezed my hand, his warmth a small anchor in the storm of my anxiety. Olivia gave me a fierce, encouraging nod, and in the corner, looking pale and physically ill, was my father. He hadn't spoken a word since he arrived, his eyes fixed on the floor. I still wasn't sure if he would go through with it. "You don't have to do this," I had told him just minutes before. He had looked up at me then, his eyes hollow. "Yes, Emma," he'd said, his voice a dry rasp. "I do." It was time. I smoothed down the front of my sharp navy blue dress, a suit of armor I had chosen specifically for this battle. I let go of Liam's hand, took one last deep breath, and walked out into the blinding, relentless glare of the lights. The flash of cameras was a physical assault, 100 tiny explosions that made me blink. I walked to the podium, my steps steady, my gaze sweeping over the sea of reporters, their faces a blur of curiosity and skepticism. I laid my notes on the lectern, my hands surprisingly steady. The silence in the room was absolute, expectant. "Good morning," I began, my voice clearer and stronger than I thought it would be. "My name is Emma Carter. For my entire professional life, I have worked for the Carter real estate empire. I helped build it. I believed in it, but I can no longer stay silent about the corruption that has taken root at its very core. Corruption orchestrated by its CEO and my mother, Margaret Carter." A wave of gasps and frantic typing swept through the room. I laid out the facts, my voice even and measured. I spoke of the shell corporations, the falsified invoices, the millions of dollars siphoned away from the company to fund my brother's failing projects. I was presenting a case, not airing family drama. And then, for the final piece of evidence, I said, "But you don't have to take my word for it. There is someone else here who can corroborate these facts. A man who has been a witness to this for years. My father, Daniel Carter." I gestured to the wings. A stunned silence fell over the press as my father walked slowly onto the stage, looking like a man walking to his own execution. He approached a second podium, his hands trembling as he gripped the sides. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the crowd of flashing cameras. A memory, sharp and painful, hit me. My father, standing just like this, handsome and proud in his tuxedo, supposed to be giving the father of the bride speech at my wedding. He was supposed to be toasting my future, his voice filled with love. Instead, he was here, about to destroy his own wife. "My wife, Margaret," he started, his voice cracking with emotion. "She is a brilliant woman, but her ambition, it has no limits. What my daughter says is true. I stood by and watched it happen for too long. She betrayed the company. She betrayed my trust. She betrayed us all." As his last words hung in the air, the doors at the back of the ballroom were thrown open with a crash. Every head swiveled, and there she was, my mother. Her face was a mask of incandescent rage, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. Security guards were trying to hold her back, but she was a force of nature, pushing her way through. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the ballroom, raw and unhinged. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "All of it, lies! You ungrateful little parasite! You'll regret this!" The room erupted into chaos. Reporters leaped to their feet, cameras flashing wildly, microphones thrust forward to catch her tirade. It was a full, public meltdown. The controlled, untouchable matriarch of the Carter Empire was unraveling for the world to see. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood tall at the podium, watching as the security guards finally surrounded her, their hands gentle but firm, as they began to escort her from the room. She was still screaming, her threats lost in the roar of the frenzied press. I watched them lead her away, a queen being dragged from her throne. In that moment, I felt a surge of triumph so powerful, it almost took my breath away. This was my moment, the public reckoning. I had won. But as the doors closed behind her, cutting off her final desperate shriek, I looked out at the chaos she had left in her wake. I saw my father, slumped over his podium, looking utterly broken. I saw the feeding frenzy of the media, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not the end. She was not done. A woman like my mother doesn't accept defeat. She reloads. The courtroom was a vacuum, silent and suffocating. All the noise of the past few months, the accusations, the frantic phone calls, the public spectacle, had been distilled into this one sterile moment. I sat between Liam and Olivia, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Across the room, my mother sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of iron composure. My father was next to her, looking like a ghost, and Trevor for once was silent, his usual arrogance replaced by a dawning slack-jawed panic. The judge cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He began to read from the papers in front of him. The words flowed together. Breach of fiduciary duty, evidence of extensive fraud, misappropriation of corporate funds. With every phrase, I felt a layer of armor I didn't even know I was wearing begin to crack. The final blow came swiftly. Citing the original bylaws of the company and the undeniable proof of my grandfather's hidden trust, the court ruled decisively. My mother was to be stripped of her position as CEO and all controlling shares, effective immediately. The company would be placed under a temporary conservatorship, with me appointed as the primary overseer, tasked with restoring its integrity. I didn't look at her, but I felt my mother's reaction across the room. It wasn't a gasp or a cry. It was a stillness. The absolute terrifying stillness of a star collapsing into itself. She had lost. Completely. A weight I had been carrying my entire life, a pressure I had mistaken for air, finally lifted from my shoulders. I felt Liam's hand gently cover mine, his touch bringing me back to the room. Olivia was smiling through tears, her face radiant with relief. Later, as we were leaving the courthouse, a figure blocked my path. It was my father. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, a man hollowed out by his own choices. "Emma," he started, his voice rough. "There's one last thing you should know." He handed me a business card. It was for a private investigator. "The man watching you, I hired him. After I came to your condo, I was terrified of what your mother would do when she realized I was no longer on her side. I hired him to protect you, not to harm you. The note, that was him, trying to scare you off a path he thought would get you killed." I stared at the card, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The watcher in the shadows, the menacing note. It was all a misguided, clumsy attempt at protection from a man too cowardly to protect me himself. I looked up at my father, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just a deep, quiet sadness for the man he could have been. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't offer absolution. I just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that this last secret was finally out in the open. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the courthouse steps. Months have passed since that day. The company is slowly healing under my leadership, the rot my mother fostered being carefully cut away. Trevor has faded into obscurity, a footnote in a story he was never meant to lead. Right now I'm standing on the deck of my new home, a small house perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It's not a mansion. It's a home I bought with the first earnings from my own company, a place that is entirely mine. The setting sun paints the sky in strokes of fiery orange and soft violet. Liam is inside making dinner. Olivia is on her way over. This is my family now, the one I chose, the one I built. I think back to that girl in the wedding dress, her world shattering around her. I wish I could tell her that the worst day of her life was actually the first day of her real life. My mother's betrayal, as cruel as it was, set me free. It forced me to find my own strength, to build my own path, and to realize that my worth was never something they could give me or take away. It was inside me all along. I look out at the endless ocean, the salty breeze warm on my face, and I whisper the words to myself, a final quiet truth. I'm enough. Your worth isn't defined by family approval. It's defined by the path you build for yourself and the respect you command along the way. True strength is realizing you are enough, all on your own. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with your family? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect and recognition too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.